Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. I'm just laughing. I've got
Already comments. Here's
already comments coming in.
CK encapsulates what many of us are feeling today. Fuck.
Okay,
There's more.
there's more.
There's
But
inside joke stuff, and we're not going to post that.
Yeah. Did something happen yesterday? Is that why CK is concerned?
I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm Daniel Wolpert. I direct Mike at the Minnesota Institute of Contemplation and Healing.
I'm Mark Van Stoenik. I direct the Center for Prophetic Imagination.
And before we get into talking about the American apocalypse, we need to do a robot bird update.
Yes.
Because a couple episodes ago, we were talking about how do the robot birds deal with migration? Like, how do they keep an eye on the areas that they leave? And you actually said, well, the robot cardinals stick around.
Mm-hmm.
And then a couple days after that, they were
sitting
caught
outside having a conversation.
Yeah. Well, first I was sitting in my office, and a robot cardinal appeared right outside my window. Stayed there looking at me. I sent Mark a picture of that, and then a couple days later, Mark and I were having a meeting outside, which is obviously a mistake when robot birds are involved. And three of them, what we talk about is so important. It needed three robot birds. They were dispatched, and three robot cardinals were sitting there tracking our every thought.
Yes. Those little avian automatons watching every gesture and move, sending it to whoever their master is.
No.
I wish we lived in a world where we had things like robot birds, but didn't have things like Donald Trump. I would accept that trade.
That would be a good trade. So the election is still happening. And so we wanted to talk about that some today. And so first of all, there are all these people that are surprised by the results. And I kind of feel bad for them, because part of me is like, why are you surprised? I'm not sure why they're surprised. And it looks like Biden is going to win, actually. But
he might get the most. He might get even the most electoral votes. But winning is a rocky course.
Yeah, but it's so slim. The margin is so slim that it's we're going to be in the midst of a months-long clusterfuck.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we wanted to talk some about today is, what does this reveal? Again, going back to this apocalyptic theme that we've been on from day one with transmission. I mean, that's what we've been talking about. The pandemic and all this stuff is revealing. I think for me, one of the things that's more and more clear about this is that we just need to talk a lot more about money and capitalism. I think that is just we're just not doing that enough.
No, and this is here's the thing, racism. Okay, yes. I'm not going to contest the idea that racism is a major force, but listening to conservative people with the racism is in the mix, the fear they have is of socialists, Black Lives Matter, and Antifa burning things down, taking over streets, hurting the economy, immigrants taking jobs, like all this sort of stuff is baked in with racism. There's too much of a conversation that we want to have about racism in a way that's divorced from those things. because the Democratic Party cares about racism divorced from those things. Like it doesn't want to deal with those things.
Right. Yeah. And so when you looked at the exit polls and people asked Trump voters, what is your number one issue and concern? They said capitalism and the economy. That's their number one concern. And I think it's important for us to realize, because as soon as, so I posted this quote that I heard this woman saying, my IRA is fine. My husband and I can do whatever we want. I'm voting for Trump, right? Which I think in many ways kind of sums up both the Trump vote and the sort of lack of enthusiasm about the Biden vote. And, so a lot of people jump on and they say, oh, this person's greedy, this person's selfish. And I agree with all those things. But what I think people do not see in that comment is that there is a positive myth here, right? That capitalism really is the best way to the good life. And in fact, just sort of the only way to the good life, and that every other way is the way to the bad life, right? And so this is why, this label of socialism is so powerful and so effective. And, why immediately the Democratic Party has got to backpedal. No, we're not socialists. We don't want Medicare for all. We don't want these things. We don't want this. No. Right. And I think that we don't look enough at how we are formed as Americans to absolutely believe that this is the only way we get to something that is good. And that's really what Donald Trump is a manifestation of.
Mm-hmm. Well, not only for the people who feel like I've got a 401k, I'm fine, but also all those millions of people who don't have a 401k and aren't fine and think that Trump will help them with that. And the reason that he hasn't is because he's been thwarted. That everything he's fundamentally said about draining the swamp and all that stuff, he meant, and he needs to be able to stay the course.
Right.
And that helps him. And this is the thing, it's easy if you're progressive or a leftist to think, oh, these conservatives are just selfish assholes. That's not entirely true. When I was a conservative, I really honestly believed that capitalism would raise all boats, that if you do welfare, does more harm than good, and that if we want charity, it should be individuals working through their church to provide it. And there's still some truth in the mix of that. It's just not a sufficient truth, and it's tainted, and it still rests too much on capitalist lies. But this idea that somehow conservatives just are somehow sociopathic or lack empathy, and that it's just because they're bad people. That's just this very capitalist individualist way of thinking. And we got to break out of that. It's not just conservatives who think in terms of individualism and blaming people's character for social problems.
Right. Yeah. And so, when you think about how the messaging that teenagers get, right? And, I've worked a lot with teenagers. When you're a pastor, you do youth ministry stuff, worked with teenagers in campus ministries and everything. And it's like, what is the one thing that teenagers hear over and over and over again in this country more than anything else? You got to get a job, right? That's what they hear. You got to get a job. You got to get a good job. And as soon as they bring up, evil ideas like, I want to be an artist, I want to be a musician, I want to help people. Immediately what they hear from their parents, the vast, vast majority of them is, well, you can't make a living doing that. And so don't do it. I had the most crazy experience, right? Because I have a musician son who co-wrote our brilliant little opening. And CK, I'm glad you like it.
Yeah, he just said, I want to just say that the intro is high level BBC graphics and super stylish. We're all about that BBC style right here.
Yeah. And, And so when we were looking at him going to college and music schools, one of the places that he applied to, but hoped he didn't get into, was Vanderbilt, because they supposedly have this good music school. And so we go out there, and we're going through the whole orientation thing and blah blah blah. The most bizarre thing about that experience was that everything that got talked about to us wasn't about music school. It was about going to medical school after college. It was completely bizarre, but it was very obvious that the message was, most of you will not make a living being a musician. This is kind of cool that you want to go to music school, but after you go to music school, you're going to go to medical school and make a lot of money. and and so this formation, we've talked a lot about formation, and we don't look at this enough. This formation that we get just simply ingrains us that the only way we are going to have a good life is through this capitalist system. And so when we get down to an election like this, there are so many people that just see Trump as the savior of that system and are going to vote for him because the other side is painted as the destroyer of that system.
Got some comments coming in.
Yeah.
Tamika writes, "I'm so emotionally exhausted, mentally drained." I think a lot of us are moving in that direction if we're not already there. And
for sure.
And this raises good questions about what does it mean to be supported in the longer struggle? Because like another part of this myths that we have in this society is that somehow you build up all your energy for this big one shot of the presidential election, and then after it, everything will just at least maybe go back to normal, and we can just rest a little bit. And so they push us, they work us into a frenzy, they guilt us, they shame us into like putting everything on this. And so of course we're going to be exhausted. Like so much is riding on this, and we've been pushed and pushed for years now on this, and the pandemic isn't making anything better. So it's important that we figure out how to take care of ourselves, take care of each other, and then also find ways to keep doing the work just all the time, and take breaks when we need, instead of like every two-year build up to an election that was the outcome in my mind has been predictable.
But see, also, Tamika, this is part of this capitalist conditioning, right? Is that we're all individuals, and at best we've got our family, right? So one or two other people, and that we're kind of going it alone, right? And that community support is bad, right? Healthcare for all is bad. Sharing resources is bad. Sharing mental energy and support is bad. And that all is horribly unhealthy for us. And so, so we end up all these little individuals out there drained and exhausted. And, it's terrible.
Jim writes, important distinction to not demonize those who appear blind from my bias. Thanks. And this is, I get into arguments about this with friends, because I have a lot of friends who are of the guillotine variety that just really want a full Mao situation here, and I'm not quite there. I'm pretty far left, but in my mind, I take Paul seriously that we wrestle against principalities and powers, not flesh and blood. So it's helpful for me to think about all these people, some of whom are my family. They're possessed. Why not use that language? It doesn't mean they're demonic. I feel like that's part of the problem. Like, just because there's evil influences that are shaping people's imagination doesn't mean that they're fundamentally demonic people. But we have a lot of work cut out for us, and it doesn't really help to like shame individuals into their for thinking bad thoughts. We have to captivate them with a better vision. This is what the whole Christian tradition was built on, is like preaching the gospel, compelling prophetic vision, calling people to something else. And like, if anything, the Democratic Party is shit at that. Like we
Well,
basically
right.
said, don't think about anything positive. What we really need to do is stop the things that are negative so we can go back to normal. And so we've that somehow early 2016, like before Trump came into office, that's the best we could hope for. Or if he gets into office, maybe we can hold his feet to the fire. I'm pretty sure in a few months, if Biden wins, we'll be able to have a bunch of conversations on the show about what does it actually look like now to hold his feet to the fire, because I'm skeptical of that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and look, we have to be real about why is it that the Democratic Party did more to stomp the left to get Biden nominated than they did to try to cast a positive vision about the future. Right? I mean, that did happen. They're more excited about all the Republicans that endorsed Biden than they were about the Bernie Sanders supporters. And it all has to do with this exact issue.
Yeah.
Let's keep rolling with the comments. Got a lot of good ones.
So artists only make a life. This is the thing, is like if you were to like step out of capitalism for a second and say, what things does a society need to be healthy and good? Artists would be in that list, but you don't need artists for capitalism unless you're talking about graphic designers for advertising, which has artistic quality to it. But let's be real about that. CK writes, how did socialism become McCarthy era communism?
Well,
I feel like it's always been McCarthy era communism.
Yeah, it's always been. And again, this is the tie to racism, right? I mean, so where did racism come from? American racism came from the fact that the landowner class, who were a very small minority population-wise in the colonies, saw the threat of the uprising of the peasants. And at that point, the peasants were all colors and from all countries. And so they had to create this system where some peasants could get a few of the scraps of capitalism. And some of the peasants were called inhuman. And it was the classic divide and conquer strategy. But it was all to maintain their way of life. And to me, that's, the McCarthy hearings were just one of the many iterations in our history of that particular tactic.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Sorry, he's right. I'm already frustrated with lack of American imagination on the good life. I'm actually sick of Americans shooting themselves in the foot when I present things. Fair trade policies, participatory budget, credit unions, co-ops, social entrepreneurship, social enterprise, municipalities, mutual aid, unions, universal basic income, and etc. It's so draining.
Yeah. And by the way, Sirius has been on fire this morning. She said some of the best verbiage about what's going on right now. Julia Dinsmore, who often watches and chimes in here, she gave a similar example, right, of this story of this guy in Iceland, an American in Iceland who got sick, went and was absolutely blown away that he basically got all this very sophisticated healthcare and it cost him like $5. And he was just blown away. And, then the question is like, why wouldn't anybody want that? Well, the reason that Americans don't want that is because they think that the system that supports that is fundamentally evil, right? And it's completely stupid. And it is against our basic human interests. But this is what the spiritual traditions have been saying for thousands of years, is that we do the things that are against our basic interests, right? I mean, you mentioned Paul, and Paul has this great comment, like, why do I do the things I don't want to do, and I don't do the things that are good for me? And this is what we're talking about.
Kathleen writes, my parents were upset when I told them I was going to be a pastor. They said I was the smart one and they had hoped I would make money. I too am a disappointment.
Me too.
Think of all the good we could have done if it reminds me, I've been thinking about this because the Chicago 7 film from Netflix came out, and the more time that passes, the less I like it because it's just such a Sorkin take on the whole thing. But the thing that lingers with me is I'm still mad at Jerry Rubin. He ties into all this stuff. He was, this leader, co-founder of the Yippies, who just later on became a stockbroker and said, I can do more good as a stockbroker than I ever could as a Yippie.
Yeah.
It just shows, like, even someone who is in the movement in a way that, months of his life was tied up in this trial. That's how powerful the myth of American capitalism is. It just really sucks even the best of us into it.
Yeah.
So
well, and you see every day, like, another billionaire that gives away some money, and everybody just starts drooling. Like, this is the solution to all our problems. Bezos's ex-wife is going to give $1 million to historically Black colleges, and everything's going to be fine.
If we don't have capitalism, how would Bill and Melinda Gates fund stuff in Africa?
That's right.
You can't just have a bunch of individuals with a socialist system kind of like doing that. You got to have one person with a lot of money doing that.
Yeah.
Adam writes, we live in a country that conflates democracy and capitalism. That is very true. What's worse, the former is sacrificed for the latter every day, and we say it's in the name of democracy. More and more, the choices made by the state are to the benefit of corporations and to the detriment of not just the people, but to the government and the systems that make it what it is, which, of course, was already bad enough on its own. And that's not even getting into all this stuff with climate change.
Right.
I wish I like, was it Belize? No, not Belize. Bolivia didn't they pass laws that gave rights to the land? Was that the one? Yeah. And so to me, it's like, again, if you look at that concept, to me, that's leaning more deeply into the spirit of democracy. But to your typical American, even a Democrat, that would be seen as undemocratic. Even the idea of democracy is a deeply contested term. We can say that socialism is a problematic term, and then we say, well, but everyone believes in democracy. I'm like, they don't mean the same thing when they say that.
Yeah, and you even look at the way we conduct, quote, democratic elections, right? I mean, the idea that you have to spend however many billions of dollars we have just spent on all these idiot consultants and everything, and advertising, and and pollsters, most of whom are obviously wrong all the time. That's how you have to conduct an election. It's like, no, that's not how you have to conduct an election. I mean, I was in Scotland when they were doing their last election, and their election season was 5 weeks long. There's no private money. Everybody gets a little bit of time on the radio, and then you vote. Like, that's Max was just telling me that the Senate race in Colorado cost $40 million.
Or the amount of money poured in to stop Mitch McConnell. It's like $60 million from outside the state poured into for a battle that Mitch McConnell still won. That's a lot of freaking money.
Handily.
Yeah.
Farad
writes, capitalism is an ideology. I think it's easy to mix up free market economy, which is a mechanism, with capitalism, which is an ideology. But it's also hard to help people see the difference. The ideology has been so fiercely market and defended. We're economically stupid in this country, generally speaking. Like, even the idea that there's a distinction between capitalism and a market economy. I mean, I don't want anyone to feel bad. It's not their fault. We don't talk about this stuff. We're not educated about this stuff. Like, you listen to NPR, which is supposed to be the balanced ones. They don't talk about that. Everyone just assumes that capitalism is natural and the next step of human evolution, and that'll lead to the utopia at the end of history.
Right.
Adam writes, socialism became McCarthy-era communism through projection. Hell, communism wasn't McCarthy-era communism. That's right. Con writes, is there less pressure to get a job in socialist countries? Don't they need money to fund programs? Is there less pressure there? I'm not an economist, trying to understand. There is less pressure because you won't die if you don't have a job. And people are free to people still get jobs because they're not doing it purely in order to survive.
Right. Yeah. And there's a sense that, so I mean, look, think about it. How many people do we all know in America that are terrified about losing their job or don't want to quit their shitty job because they're going to lose their health care?
Yeah.
I mean, I talk to people about that every day, right? In a socialist country where healthcare is considered a right and you get healthcare, that worry does not even exist. And in fact, when people hear about that worry in America, they're just sort of stunned. They're like, "Oh my gosh, that would be horrible," right? And again, it's not that people aren't interested in working, right? Because that's one of the great capitalist things. Oh, in a socialist country, everybody's just lazy. There's no motivation to work or to do anything. They just want to sit around and suck off the government tit,
Yeah.
and it's like, no, that's not what happens, right? I mean, people are freed up to be able to do the things that they really love to do. And so, yeah, I mean, jobs are important and figuring out what you want to do is important, but it is not the be all end all of what makes you a decent human being, right? The number of people who, when they have some economic struggles, feel incredibly ashamed, don't want to talk to people about that, feel like they're losers and failures and horrible human beings. That's all this capitalist brainwashing.
Maria writes, I had a whole different perspective of capitalism when I read the history of cotton. Capitalism undermined a thriving home cottage industry all over the world. The machines, the factories, and the like were not economical on their own. They required government intervention to create the conditions favorable to the oppressive industrial revolution. This is an old struggle. I mean, there's precursors to that, and we've seen that trajectory continue. It's like, think about the robot conversation. That's, to me, is one of the best uh, revelatory examples of like how the system works. Theoretically, if we were all replaced by robots, there'd still be the same amount of income coming in. So then we could all rest easy as robots do our work for us. But that's not what we think. We think, wow, I guess those robots are replacing people and they're going to have to die. I mean, the alternative is to tax those rich people, but we don't want to do that. That's socialism. So it's better to let people die because they're being replaced by robots. Like and we think that's fair and just because while they're not working, I guess they should die. A lot of people just kind of think that. Or they think, well, that's what churches are for.
Yeah.
Just to help with that. Max writes, I appreciate the language of evil influence. Everyone in my circle is talking about systemic evil. Then election day, it's almost entirely about individual voters are just terrible people. You're right. I hate that shit.
I know.
At a fundamental level, I don't believe I'm better than my father who votes for Trump. I don't believe that. I think I understand things better. I think I understand things better in a way that maximizes my compassion and how it affects the world. But I don't think I'm a fundamentally more compassionate person than my father. I think he's just ensnared. And I think we need to think about that. And I know people hate when I talk about this because somehow it's too sensitive towards white men. Like, but whatever. Like, if we're not going to, I can't shame my father towards being good. And the guillotine people are right. Like, if you're not willing to appeal to people and not willing to call people to something else and create a different system, then the only alternative left after a certain point is just to murder them all. And that's what revolution looks like when it goes bad. So there's a little dark moment for you. Kathleen writes, my daughter was captivated by the vision of Bernie Sanders. She and many young people have given up on politics because of the way he was treated by the Democratic Party.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I, as far as I'm concerned, we need a serious third party option in this country. I mean, we just need to really move on from the Democratic Party and begin to talk about these things much more seriously and project a much more healthy vision, because the sad truth is that the Democratic Party is just as allied to capitalism as the Republican Party is, and they're not going to give that up. And so, to continue to get fooled into the fact that somebody like Biden is going to fundamentally give us a different view of life and reality, it's just not going to happen.
all the people who are listening who hate third-party voters are gonna jump on you, Dan. James writes, I feel cynical about American politics on a good day.
Yeah,
fair.
there we
I have a
go.
buoyant eschatology where all will be one day gathered in Christ. But how can we move from a passive eschatology to real change now?
Yeah.
And that's a deep question. Why are you
Yeah.
asking this?
Yeah. Well, and one of the things we were talking about beforehand, I mean, Mark and I have a lot of experience in intentional community and trying to create spiritual community. And people have all kinds of excuses as to why they don't want to do that. I mean, they start out and they say they want to do that, right? Like
the
I have
idea
this
is so
joke.
beautiful. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
I mean, I have this joke that if I had $1 for everybody that said they want to do intentional spiritual community, but then wouldn't show up for a first organizing meeting, like I would actually be a millionaire. That would be a great way for me to make $1 million in
Can you
America.
share that with me?
Yeah, absolutely. Just like we're going to share all the transmission donations together. And people make all kinds of excuses for that, but I think fundamentally the bottom line is this money thing. Is that people in America are terrified of talking about money, sharing money, pooling resources. I mean, you literally can watch people begin to have a panic attack when you start to talk about this. And this is why these communities fail. And people act out.
I have
People
firsthand
do all
experience
kinds.
with failure based on that.
Yeah. I mean, I do too. And it's really impressive to watch. And you can very much see how this ingrained formation is holding us back. And so, James, I think that's what we've got. That's what we have to get at and talk about.
Gus writes, New Zealand did the same thing, giving rights to the land. Yeah. I mean, that's the other piece of this. Like, I don't want to stagger and layer all the shit for everyone, but like before this pandemic and the worry about fascism, we had enough to worry about already with the climate change situation, which isn't getting any better. Like we're in crises on top of crises, and some of us are more insulated from it than others. But there's a lot of work to be done. So we really need to figure out, and I could start crying right here about the way that the church engages this. To me, I've gotten very cynical about the nature of the church in America. And I'm not talking about the 81% of evangelicals who voted for Trump. I'm talking about across the board. We're all so indebted. Like even the most progressive church, they don't want to talk about this shit because they have supporters on both sides. And they don't want to. And
they
it's
got
really
their big donor.
It's about donations.
Yeah, they got their big donors. They're going to walk.
Seminaries. The reason they don't take risks because they're the trustees. Like it's all tied into capitalism. And if you're tied into capitalism, you're tied into the patriarchy. You're tied into white supremacy. You're tied into xenophobia. You're tied into transphobia. Check off all the shit boxes. You're tied into all that. Because you lack you lack the courage to proclaim the gospel. And so all you pastors listening who don't say things because you're worried about offending people, the time is up. We either turn or we burn at this point. I'm not talking about hell. I'm talking about increased heat, melting polar ice caps, and then all the shit that comes out of that, like increased immigration, which will then in turn causes increased fear, hoarding of wealth, fascism, war, oil wars, water wars, So we need to get it together.
Yeah. Well, but in order to have the courage to do that, you see, and this is the thing, this is why these two things go hand in hand. In order to have the courage to do that, you can't do that from an individualist capitalist perspective because you will just get your ass fired and kicked out on the street and you won't be able to take care of your family.
Yeah, that's why.
This is why the communal thing is mandatory for this. And we just don't get. We don't want to get that these two things go hand in hand. And for years, I've talked about the fact that pastors want to have the American dream and talk about Jesus at the same time, and you cannot do those two things.
Look, I know it's hard. Like choosing not to go down the path Like I chose the path I'm in now, and I don't have health insurance that's adequate enough. So I'm losing teeth. I make $20,000 a year, and that's because I'm actually got enough of a profile to fundraise that amount for myself. But it's hard going. Like, so I know it's hard, but we gotta. If more people take the risks, then we have community together, and we can support each other.
Right.
So I'm not going to go off on that. I've already spent too much on that. Everything.
All right. So we got to just roll through this. We're way over time, but obviously today's a big day.
Adam writes, everything we do is dependent on art at the heart of society and have never been honored as such. Art does too much for the people by teaching imagination and critical thinking, which threaten a government that doesn't work for the people. You're right. It's a totally different logic to value art in our society. Kathleen writes, what's that? You going to say something?
I was just going to say, and Adam is a great artist.
Adam is a great artist. Catherine, Adam's partner, is a great artist.
Yeah.
Neither of them are valued enough in our society. Catherine writes, I think the only thing I've learned about the American way of life is, quote unquote, follow the money.
Yeah.
CK writes, everybody loves Bruce Wayne and wants to be Batman. Fuck Batman. That's all I'm going to say about that. He could do so much good by giving his money up.
Yeah.
Heather Lynn writes, started reading Slavery's Capitalism yesterday. Seemed to be like a good thing to do on election day. Yeah.
No.
Farad writes, it's heartbreaking to hear people have to conform to protect their health care. I'm writing from the UK. Here, everyone contributes to the national pot of healthcare all their lives, so healthcare is freely available. I'm so jealous of you.
Yeah.
I wish we had that.
Damn socialist.
Yeah. Max writes, yes, I love the robot stuff.
No.
Lost my foot. Wow, there's lots of comments.
Yeah, there's lots.
We're going to blaze through it. Timothy writes, the U.S. still has puritanical ideas about work and social programs. In truth, people do not need the threat of hunger or homelessness to motivate them. For example, experiments with universal basic income show people actually become more motivated to get their lives more ordered. My experience is that it's true. The healthier I feel, the more I want to go to work.
Yeah.
And the less healthy I feel, especially mentally healthy, the harder it is for me to work, even though I'm doing it out of fear sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, the motivational thing is complete nonsense and the exact opposite. If you're free to do the things that you love to do, you're very motivated. When you're not motivated is when you have to go to some shit ass job that doesn't even pay a living wage. That is not motivating.
I could say more about that, but we're going to keep moving on. I can't shame my father toward being good. Yeah. James writes, that's a good distinction. My Trumpy dad cares about people, but he is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Lots of echoing. Technology should alleviate work. It would under socialism, but under capitalism, technology displaces, enslaves, and harms people.
Yeah, and actually makes them work more. I mean, I'm old enough to remember that the great dream of the computer was that it was going to reduce the work week to 20 hours a week. We just wouldn't have to work anymore because the computer was going to do it. Now we work all the time because of computers. And because we have not questioned the logic of capitalism.
Michael writes, I'm not sure that quote unquote socialism is fundamentally better or worse than the other options, but I do know that the presumptive value of work, capital, and income in our society makes me sad. There's so much more to life than money. Heather Lynn writes, the two-party system is a false binary, yet quite a strong hold in the political system. A third party would need some real hardcore strategy to cut through and create effective change. Man, I wish we could go full parliamentary system and even have more than three, but even getting three seems
and it would take a long time. But I guess my perspective on it at this point is that, the little time and energy I have left, I'm interested in working on something that is actually intelligent and viable and good, even if it doesn't succeed.
At the twilight of your years.
That's why I'm such a failure in life in general, because that's my approach.
Susan writes, a former UMC, United Methodist pastor, once preached on scarcity mindset and how damaging it is to justice and peace. I believe it. I agree.
Yeah.
That's what causes all kinds of insecurities and to pour over into fascism. Anthony writes, how do you guys feel about the new Borat movie? What does he expose about our current situation? I haven't seen it.
Yeah, I haven't seen it either.
I
I've
watched
heard
the
a little
first one
bit about it.
twice, and the first time I watched it, I thought it was funny, and then the second time I watched it, I realized I was just so like overwhelmed that I thought it was funny, but I didn't like it, so I haven't seen the second one. Adam writes, being kicked out on the street and not being able to provide for your family is also a myth to keep people in line. Yeah, or it's a story that we tell people is going to happen to them for sure. James writes, if only more doctors went to music school. They'd have better music selection while you're sitting in the doctor's office, at least.
Maybe.
Heather Lynn, I'm an artist. I'm grateful to you for saying this. Yeah, I like at
my
best, I like to think of myself as an artist, and I would do more art if I felt like I felt free to do so. Jim writes, since we have a mixed economy, as in containing socialist elements, there's no pure free market. It would be nice if the word socialism wasn't demonized, as in we could have universal health care without being communist. Yeah, it'd be great, although I'm an anarcho-communist, so I think that'd be okay too. Ceres writes, I appreciate your words about your father, Mark. I'm at the same place with my family. I hope this isn't the first and only time my father decides to listen to transmission. I don't want to dump on him, but yeah. Adam writes, Heather Lynn, I think for a new third party to effectively throw their hat in, we need the people with support from those not committed to the Democratic Party and who really do champion the interests of the people to leave the party and bring the vote with them. It would have to be a huge organized shift, but I don't think it's impossible. And already people, I can imagine the progressives in the Democratic Party being angry at this suggestion because short-term always beats long-term.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a long-term project, but that's okay.
Heather Lynn writes, being devoted to my art music exclusively for over a decade now, one of the biggest struggles has been how my psyche and mental health have been impacted for not being valued well, time and time and time again. It's exhausting. I feel it.
Yeah, it is. It's really tough.
We made it through the comments. We're past 40 minutes. We did that because it's a big day. We are, unfortunately, you're not going to see our beautiful faces until next Tuesday. We're going to be off for a very long weekend for a number of reasons that we're not going to tell you. We're going to go start a third party. No, I was kidding. We'll be back Tuesday, and by God, I feel better about the world on Tuesday. Let's see. We got.
I don't think we will.
Even if things got a little better, I don't think I would, because I tend to be that way anyway. But yeah, I think we're in this for a while before we feel any sense of resolution. So
yeah. All right. Love you all. Thanks so much for joining in. See
you next time.